welcome to the CC. My name is David, and today we're going to be taking a look at the iPad Air 2 in 2024 and seeing if it's still useful today or if you just should skip it. So let's get into the video. So the iPad Air 4 was released in 2014, and it was the successor to the original iPad Air. Now, the original iPad Air was such a huge difference in design compared to the past generation iPads, but essentially it took its design from the iPad mini. And yeah, I mean, this iPad design has aged fairly well, I'd say. I think it still looks pretty good today, honestly. And, you know, because it has like these smooth edges, it is quite a comfortable tablet to hold, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, the iPad Air 2 was one of the thinnest Apple devices ever made, and it still is pretty thin today. And because it's so thin, it also means it's fairly light. And yeah, I mean, it's a really just nice portable design that feels good in the hand. And of course, it's made of aluminum on the back, and it has a fully glass display in the front. And you do have a home button here, but this was the first time that Touch ID was on the iPad Air and just on the iPad series as a whole. And it is Touch ID 1. However, I think that it's more than usable today. And yeah, it still feels fairly quick. So yeah, it's just pretty nice to have Touch ID, especially on an iPad. Now, this was also the first iPad that got rid of the mute switch on the top here. And you know, honestly, I don't really miss it. It was kind of nice to have, but at the same time, it wasn't necessary. But just keep that in mind. It doesn't have a mute switch, and all the following iPads after this didn't have a mute switch as well. So kind of set the trend for that. Now, the biggest thing I think with the iPad Air 2 was actually its display. This was the first time that Apple had put a laminated display on the iPad, and I think it really made a big difference to the quality of its display. Of course, it's essentially the same as you were getting on the regular iPad Air. However, being laminated, it does have like a very nice quality to it. It doesn't have the air gap in between. And yeah, it's just a really nice display to look at. You don't get anything like P3 color gamut, but I think that today, you know, this display is more than usable. And for most people, they're not going to really miss having a P3 color gamut, especially if you're using this iPad for like media consumption. So yeah, it's a fairly great display today. It is 264 pixels per inch. And, you know, Apple's been sticking to that pixels per inch for quite a while now. So yeah, it's still a Retina display, still looks great. And, you know, colors look great. It's just a really nice display. Now, one of the bad things about this iPad Pro, though, is that because it's so thin, when you have something playing on the speakers, it actually vibrates quite a bit. And it's kind of funny because you'll be watching something or playing music and your hands are vibrating while the speakers are on, and it's just because it's so thin. And I think this is actually kind of coming back as a complaint now with the new iPad Pros, because they made them so thin. When you have the speakers on, it kind of vibrates as well. So just something to keep in mind. You know, it is a thin device, and having speakers on will make it vibrate. Now, what is kind of different with mine here, you might be looking at this and be like, oh, what is that black plastic strip there? This is actually a pass-through for the cellular antenna. But if you had an iPad and it had cellular connectivity, you probably had this strip of black on the top that's made out of plastic just so that the cellular could pass through. And I know that like with later generation iPads, I think it was like the 9.7-inch iPad Pro, that was the first time it just had like a thin plastic strip on the back of the device, kind of like the iPhone 6 did. And I mean, yeah, I guess that looked better, but finally with the 2018 iPad Pros, they switched it to be like a symmetrical kind of outline, and I think that looked way better. But yeah, big plastic cover. Now, what does this iPad have about it that makes it useful today? And I think the biggest thing for it is going to be as a media consumption device. So if you're watching YouTube videos, watching Netflix, you know, watching movies, just whatever, I think that this is a really stellar device to watch them on, just because it's so thin and light. It has a fairly good display still, and one of the biggest things is that it still has a headphone jack right here. You remember these? Yeah, a headphone jack. You can use your headphones plugged in, and I think that that makes it a really great consumption device for watching videos. And you know, if you're watching today, you might have like AirPods or whatever, and of course you can connect them to here as well. But for most people, they're just going to want to connect, you know, regular earbuds, and yeah, this can do it. So yeah, I think that's where this device really shines. Another way that you can use this device is as an e-reader, because, you know, it's not super big, it's super portable, you can bring it basically everywhere. So I think that's where this iPad really shines. One thing I will say is that this was the first iPad to have the A8X processor, and this was actually a pretty substantial bump over the A8 that was in the iPhone 6, just because this had more graphics performance, and I think that that really helped this iPad, along with 2 GB of RAM. And the iPhone 6 only had 1, and if you remember, the iPhone 6 was cut off at iOS 12. However, this iPad was like one of the longest supported Apple devices ever. It was able to reach up to iPad OS 15. And yeah, I mean, that's like 2 or 3 generations behind now, but like the fact that this iPad here was able to reach that many generations higher than the iPhone 6 with the A8 processor just shows you how good this iPad really was. And, you know, this is the same software that the iPhone 6s is able to run. And I mean, that has the A9, in which I would argue is actually quite a substantial increase over the A8. It was just really cool to see that the A8X was able to support up to iPad OS 15. Now, you still get security updates. I actually got a security update on this iPad the other day, so it's not like Apple was just forgetting about it. But do keep in mind, in the next couple of years, you may lose app support. So if you're using apps, I would just keep them downloaded as it is right now. Don't delete anything. And yeah, just keep using them. Now, one of the things I will say though, I don't think you should necessarily go out of your way to buy a 2014 iPad Air 2. I mean, it's 2024 now, and this is a 10-year-old device, and it's gonna be feeling like a 10-year-old device. So if I were you and you were in the market and looking to buy a new iPad, I would really consider the 10th generation iPad or the 4th generation iPad Air. If you can swing it, I would also highly consider the 5th generation iPad Air, just because you get the M1 processor. But for most people, I think the A14 processor that's in the 10th generation iPad and the Air 4 is more than enough. And you're gonna get the new iPad design. It's still thin and portable and light, but it's just a much nicer experience in my opinion, just because you're getting such a modern iPad. But for people who have an iPad Air 2, it doesn't necessarily mean that this isn't useful anymore. I think that its usefulness is actually just going to be as your media consumption device. I mean, it's not like just because this is an old iPad, it can't do anything anymore. I think it's still fantastic for watching videos, and it's still fantastic for reading books. So for those use cases, I think that this is a really great iPad. I mean, using it for basic tasks, I mean, you can still do some light web browsing on it. You can do emailing, just stuff like that. I think that this is still fairly good. I think this pretty much sums up my review of the iPad Air 2 in 2024. I think it's still a good iPad for doing basic iPad things. So, you know, watching movies, playing some light games, and reading books. Like, this is still a pretty great iPad today. And if you have one that's in good condition like this, I don't think that you should necessarily stop using it for those tasks. Obviously, if you're looking to do things like video editing, photo editing, I think that's when you should really consider buying the newer iPads. But for most people, they use their iPads for mostly watching stuff. So yeah, I mean, if you have this iPad, it's more than usable today, so keep on using it. Yeah, I think that having old tech around can still be useful. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any suggestions or comments for anything that you'd like to see reviewed, let me know in the comments down below. If you liked what you saw, consider subscribing to see more just like this. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.